Good evening. I would like to begin by thanking every one of you for being here today to remember Jim. Thank you as well for the visits, calls, messages, thoughts, and prayers throughout Jim's illness and after his passing on April 19th, 2020. Jim had many favorite songs, some of which you will hear tonight. The first one is a song that Jim asked Melissa to learn on the piano because he liked it. He thoroughly enjoyed sitting with her listening to this song. Kevin, Melissa, and Stephanie are going to play and sing Chasing Cars by Snow Patrol.
Show me a garden that's bursting into Let's waste time chasing cars around our heads. I need your grace to remind me to fight my own. Oh, if I lay here, if I just lay here, would you lie with me and just forget the world? Get what we're told before we get too old. Show me a garden that's bursting into life. If I lay here, if I just lay here, would you lie with me and just forget the world?
I would like to take a moment to explain how we got to this day. In March of 2020, Jim spent 2 separate sessions in hospital. And that was, of course, when COVID was coming into our lives. The news was all over the television, and we watched it. The second week that Jim was there, we'd already gone into where I could be his only visitor. There were restrictions for gatherings and all the rest of it. And I said to him, I said, what should we do if something happens to one of us? He said, bury me and have a party later. So after 2 years and 3 cancellations, we're finally here tonight to have that party. You knew Jim, so you knew he liked to tell a story. I want to retell some of the stories that I've heard, some, a lot. But I'd also like you to share with me later this evening, if you could, your favorite story about Jim. And I'm sure there's some that I haven't heard before. Jim's story began December 25th, 1950. He liked to tell people, because he was born on Christmas Day, that he was the closest thing to Jesus that a lot of them would ever see. He was born just before midnight, after his mother had had a full day of Christmas celebrations, cooking with family and friends. James Percy Barkman was the name he was given. Jim never really liked that middle name. So he asked his mom why she would give him such an awful name. And his mother told him that she really liked that name. So Jim, adoring his mother, accepted her explanation. Jim was the oldest of what would become 4 children. Ruth, being the oldest, was 4 years older. And the day that Jim arrived announced that her life was over with the arrival of a baby brother. Rick was born 4 years later and Teeny 4.5 years after that. Rick and Jim had many stories of growing up. One he liked to tell was when they had a motorcycle. Jim, being the older brother, was driving, and Rick was riding on the back. Jim lost control of the bike on the gravel road and they wiped out. Jim said he looked back and saw Rick lying there flat on his back and in the middle of the road and not moving. He thought, oh, I've killed him. He ran back to Rick, who came to life, come up swinging, and Jim said, I wished I had. Jim became a journeyman welder and a journeyman mechanic. He used these skills all of his life, even when he was pipelining, driving truck, operating his own oil field service business, and raising cattle. I think he was happiest in the years he operated his own mechanic shop on the farm. He could and would fix anything. I remember throwing out a portable Mixmaster because it wouldn't work. He dug it out of the garbage, fixed it, and I still use it today. I met Jim for the first time in October of 1986. He came home from the bar with my first husband. Dick told Jim that he thought I might not be very happy, so maybe Jim should come with him. Jim used to like to tell the story of me and my rocking chair, and he over-exaggerated how I was rocking back and forth when these guys arrived. The next time I saw him was May the 1st, 1987, 35 years ago tomorrow. He walked in the back door of the local bar with Bruce and Bill. I was there with my mom and Betty Ann. Jim came over, took his glove off, and asked me to dance. We danced, and at the end of the night, I asked him if he was coming home with me. He said he hadn't had a better offer. He came home with me that night and never left. We were married January 22nd, 1988. We set to work with the goal of combining our two families. I think we did very well. Failure was not an option. Over the next 32 years, we had our 4 children. He liked to call yours, mine, and theirs. Marshall and Lenore were his. Tom was mine. And Tammy was theirs, having been from my first husband's first marriage. Our kids turned into weddings, and then there were 9 grandbabies. It was a whirlwind. I always said, there was Ash, and then there were 9. Add the first great-grandchild, and since Jim's passing, a second great-grandchild. Jim loved to hold babies. He would scoop a baby out of anyone's arms when he entered a room. Jim loved his kids, all 4 of them. He loved the grandkids, all 9 of them. But Logan was a special gift at a special time. Jim and Logan had an undescribable bond. Jim was also a godfather, a very proud godfather. We were honored when Michael and Shauna asked us to be godparents to Sarah. Jim was involved in numerous activities outside of work. He was president of the Three Hills Rodeo Committee for many years and worked hours preparing for and at the rodeo. He attended 13 grade 6 campouts and set up camp for us to prepare food for students. He was named a Friend of Education by Torrington School for the work he did to support students. He made an Olympic torch for us one year, and the students all recited the Olympic pledge. Jim went on a camping trip with Tom's grade 12 class. One of the mothers on the camping trip had a flat tire on her truck. Jim changed the tire with a hammer and a chisel. Another story just came to light this year after Rick received an Acme history book. In there was a picture of two men with a team of horses. People were not identified. The story told of traveling through Acme and their car breaking down. Along came a wagon with a team of horses. The driver offered to help and proceeded to get the car running using his Leatherman. The Leatherman was like a badge to Jim. We got that team of horses one Christmas season when we traveled around central Alberta talking to horse people, most friends of Jim's, but definitely met some characters. Lee and Deb were our partners in crime through that journey. It was the coldest Christmas season in a long time, but the mission was accomplished. Topsy and Ginger became a part of the family. One of my favorite horse stories was the summer Katie's friend Chrissy got married at the Acme Ranch. Jim was asked to provide a horse-drawn wagon for the bride and groom. The horses' duties were finished when the bride and groom were delivered to the hall. Jim and Lee were bringing the horses back, horse and wagon back to the ranch when they went down a back alley, past a group of bikers partying in the backyard. Imagine the reaction of the bikers when they saw the just married sign on the back of the wagon with Jim and Lee in front. Jim and his team of horses were amazing to watch. He loved spending time with them. He did numerous hay and sleigh rides in the community and especially around home. He had a way with animals that was amazing. He said he would have been a veterinarian if circumstances had permitted, and he would have been a good one. Riding a motorbike was another passion of Jim's. We started with an anniversary edition Goldwing and then progressed to the old Harley that's here today. We had a couple of Harley touring bikes, one we wrecked when we hit a deer, but the old bike was always the favorite. We rode thousands of miles and saw lots of country in Alberta, BC, and the northwestern United States. One pet peeve of Jim's seen on these bike trips was he didn't believe that hay bales or straw bales should be left out in the field very long. He said people didn't deserve them. I remember returning home and finding our hay had been baled, and we had to rig up and haul those bales in or muster them for pickup. Another favorite of Jim's that we brought today is the '69 Chevelle. Jim had a Chevelle when he was a young man and always talked about it and wished he had never sold it. Marshall and Tom listened to those stories for years, so when Jim turned 60, the boys found this car. With a few close calls, the car was delivered as a surprise. Jim was speechless. Yes, Jim, speechless. I had to tell him he could touch it. It was his. The pavement in the front of our house took a beating that day with the donuts and smoke shows that took place. But Jim said afterwards that the best ride of the day was when he had Kevin, Marshall, and Tom in the car, and he smoked it up. He said those young men squealed like little girls. Jim had numerous work experience students in his shop and had lots of stories to tell about them. One was Brett Stockwood, who now repairs the big engines of the big boats for the Coast Guard and others. Jim said he knew Brett was a talented young man when on one of the first days Jim observed him sweeping the floor with one hand and texting on his phone with the other. I'd like to call Lenore and Marshall up to give a tribute to their dad.
It's hard to do justice to this great man and his 69 years on planet Earth, but I will attempt to give you a glimpse into his life. Like Deb said, he was born on Christmas Day, 1950. Grandma Winnie always said he was the best Christmas present she ever got. Dad was known by so many people from so many walks of life and his different careers. Some of you grew up with him. Some worked with him at Reimer's Feedlot. Some got rescued by him in his ambulance and firefighting days. Others welding and working at Linden Machine Works, at Nihil Gas Co-op, and some drove truck with him. Or some worked with him when he owned the bed truck and picker truck. Some got to know him through his mechanic shop, or some of you had stuff welded by him, or got to ride with him on the open road. Plus, there's all the personal relationships that were made in his 69 years. Dad was a very outgoing guy, and whenever I met someone and was trying to explain who I was, I'd say, "I'm Jim Barkman's daughter," and 9 times out of 10, they'd know Dad. An example of this, I was talking to an older gentleman at the Red Deer Farm Show last fall. I explained where I was from, and it turned out he was from this area as well, but further north. I explained I was Jim's daughter, and he's like, "Oh, I know Jim." Then a story began. 30 years ago, when his daughter was a teenager, her and a couple girlfriends were heading to a party down Three Hills Way. It was -40 in a blizzard. They turned down the wrong road and got stuck. It was the road just east of Dad's farm. The girls started walking through the coulee and the pasture towards some lights, and eventually ended up at Dad's back door. No shoes, hypothermic, and frozen fingers and toes. I stopped and said, "Wait a minute, I was there that night. I know those girls, they nearly died." Dad brought them into the house, and knowing first aid, he started to treat them and then took them to the hospital. Those girls recovered, but it left a lasting impression on me. Dad always helped wherever he could. Growing up, Dad helped his mom and dad out on the farm, raising cattle, milking, choring pigs, and grain farming. He also helped his dad doing many jobs in the community, like wiring houses, building projects, and assisting him on working on telephones. At 13, he was supposed to help build their house. It's the one that we currently live in. Grandpa Frank was busy working, so Dad and Grandma Winnie would be building and working on finishing the drywalling, mudding, and painting. Dad always had a lot of trucking stories to tell. He'd talk about the trips up to Alaska, hauling dynamite on the ice roads, and how they stopped at a little place to eat. And Dad had made amazing tomato soup with hot water, ketchup, and salt and pepper. And I'm not sure why the restaurant didn't have any food, why they just had hot water and ketchup, but that was one of his stories. I think back to my earliest memories of Dad when I was a toddler. It was probably him going to work at the gas co-op. I would cry when he left for work, and I was waiting at the same window for him to return at the end of the day. A father-daughter bond that could never be broken, even from a young age. Sometimes he let me go to work with him at the gas co-op. The office was shared with Abe Thiessen and his milk trucks. Marshall owns that shop now. Dad would let me do paperwork with him. And while Dad was doing his thing, I was practicing his signature, which I nailed. And to this day, I can still sign his name, well, his scribble. And then we go up to the Chinese restaurant for coffee, and he'd give me my own little chocolate milk, and I could drink as many little creamers as I wanted. While he drove truck for Hannah's, we were able to take some trips with him out to the West Coast. Those were the best memories, the smell of burnt diesel in the cold morning, the anticipation of the trip, and sleeping in the bunk while he was driving, and just hanging out with Dad. Dad was a great harmonica player. He had a briefcase beside him in the truck with every key of harmonica. It kept him awake while driving, because you can only eat spits and drink coffee so much, right? He had a harmonica holder that he could put over his neck. I have it over there on the table. And he could still have both hands free to drive. He could play every song on the radio and every song in his case of cassettes. He learned to play harmonica upside down, and of course, to be just like my dad, so did I. He had countless stories of wrecks as he saw going through the passes. He'd talk about those times when the roads were so bad going down the mountain, he'd look in his mirror and see his trailers trying to pass him. And those sketchy loads on the docks at the West Coast, where you have to unhook one trailer and grab another. But his advice was, you always grab your snipe pipe, because you might have to beat a few guys off who are trying to rob you. He always got in and out of there as fast as possible. To Dad, it didn't matter how old you were. If you thought you could do it, he'd tell you to give it a try. When I was about 9 or 10, he needed a vehicle moved from where Fessler lived to Brucey's yard. So Dad hopped in his vehicle and told me to follow in that green Ford gas co-op truck. He took off and I started to follow. It was getting dark and I didn't want to lose him. So I didn't want to get lost. I didn't know exactly where I was going at that age. So anyways, he took off, and I started up the road, and then I was like, he turned the corner, and I didn't know where he went. So that corner came up a little bit quicker than I expected. I had to make the turn, and before I knew it, I had that Ford sliding sideways. I can't believe I stayed on the road. But then I saw his taillights again, and I knew I wasn't far behind. When we got to Brucey's, Dad just said, "You took that corner a little quick, didn't you?" That's all that was said. Another time, when I was about the same age, Dad and I were in the tractor loading bales, and the hired man couldn't catch on how to drive and where to stop the truck and trailer in the right spot so Dad could load the bales. Dad was patient for a while, but daylight was ticking, so he told the hired man to go back to the yard and sweep the floor and put me in the truck. He told me I was smart and I could definitely learn how to drive a big truck. Well, I must have done a good job because I never got demoted to sweeping the floor. Dad always had horses, and they were a big part of his life. He talked about his Stormy horse and how it was one of the best horses he ever had. He always made sure I had horses growing up. When him and Uncle Rick would get telling stories about their younger years, it's amazing that they both lived. Riding horses while shooting at each other with guns, to breaking horses, to surviving cougar attacks while out riding the horses. And to this day, Dad always had a piece of his kneecap missing from one of those cougar attacks. Those boys lived the Wild West. Dad would tell me about stories of days gone by, like the nights he would sneak out of the house as a teenager, get help from a certain sibling, and push a vehicle down the driveway to the end of the road. They'd fire up the vehicle, go out on a tear, and then when it came time to come home, they shut the vehicle off at the end of the driveway and push it back into the yard. No one was the wiser. One year when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, Uncle Claude's, Uncle Rick, and Dad took us 4 cousins out sledding. It wasn't a normal sled, however. It was a hood off an old truck. They flipped it upside down, grabbed a chain, and hooked it to one of their 4-wheel drive trucks. Us kids piled on, and away we went across the prairie at 60 miles an hour. Talk about a ride that will change your life. Dad loved lightning storms, and even as a little girl, we'd watch storms together. Even up till the end, he would often ask what the weather was doing at our place, as he liked to watch it. Many times we'd watch the summer storms roll in on the back deck and stay there, rain pouring down, enjoying each other's company. Dad got into pulling horses and also he went to pulling competitions and later just for pleasure. One story I'll tell you about was forever etched in my mind. Dad got a new team, Shorty and Scotty, and they were green-broke. Dad would harness them up a few times and let them stand. Then one day he thought it would be good that they would be hooked to the stone boat. So Dad's stone boat had 2 beams and then had a wooden platform that he stood on, and then there was a big pipe that went across the top so he could brace against it. It took several attempts before they would back into where they were close enough to be hooked to the stone boat. As soon as they felt the resistance of the sled, they took off. Dad was trying to slow them down, but they only went faster. As Dad was bracing off the front pipe of the stone boat, going Mach 2 across the pasture, the pipe couldn't take the force and bent forward. With Dad's bracing gone, away he went, bouncing across the prairie on his stomach, still holding onto the lines. I thought he'd be dead by the time the horses stopped. They circled around and finally stopped. Dad still holding on and still alive. Man, I was thankful to see him get off that ground. I thought he was dead after that. That team turned out to be a great team after Dad had had them for a while. Later, he got Ginger and Topsy, and what an amazing team they were. Dad loved them, and they respected Dad. He never let them get away with a bad habit. Dad thought they were bomb-proof, and then one day, it was tested when he was giving rides in town with a wagon full of people, and the train came by, blowing its horn right beside them. Dad knew how to keep them calm. He also brought the team to our Barkman family gathering one year, lighting up people's faces, both young and old. One Christmas, we pulled our girls behind the little sleds behind the big sleigh. There will be a picture of that in the slideshow. I enjoyed every minute when we harnessed up the team with Dad, whether we hooked it up to a sleigh or wagon or just stood around chatting in the barn while the girls stood in harness, working on their patience. When Dad had his picker truck and bed truck, I got to go on the ride-alongs with him. One job, we were called to the rigs, and we were there all day and into the night, no food. But I didn't care, I was just with my dad. One trip when Dad and I made together, we went to Uncle's funeral in Abbotsford. We left right after work and drove all night. The funeral was in the morning, and we headed back to Alberta immediately after it was over. Before we got home, Kevin was informed that I left him for an older man. I had been seen in Abbotsford walking arm in arm with an older man. Well, I did, it was my dad. And therefore, I guess Kevin and I were no longer a couple. Well, that rumor had beat us home. That was a standing joke for all of us. I spent many days in the shop. I loved to work on trucks and vehicles, and he enjoyed the help. We'd work all morning, and then at 12 noon, no matter what we were doing, the shop was closed for lunch. At 1, we were back at work. At 5, the doors would shut for the day, and he'd say, well, why don't you come to the back deck for a drink? Didn't matter we worked all day together. There was still more to discuss on that back deck. Every single one of his friends know what I'm talking about. Thousands of hours were spent on that deck reminiscing and solving the world's problems. Even when he was sick, we'd still spend as much time out there as we could. Dad and I worked together very well in the shop. It didn't matter what kind of job it was. In the days when Kevin and I ran our 2140 John Deere tractor, the inner PTO shaft would break. I'd call Dad and tell him it was broke, and he'd say, I got a spot open for you. We'd split that tractor in half from the top and get it inside and replace it. Dad and I knew each other's job, our own jobs, and at the end, we could have that thing apart and back together in 2.5 hours. John Deere's fastest time was 14. This one particular day, we worked together, and if it was ever brought up, Dad would laugh so hard every time. It was a day. I was working with him, and every single job that day had an electrical issue. And to give you insight, I absolutely hate to be shocked. And Dad knew that. So, after about the third job that day, to say I was jumpy was an understatement. The next job was to tackle an electrical issue on a fuel truck. So Dad pulled off the passenger seat, and that's where the batteries were. So he was doing some testing and dropped a wrench between the battery and the box. So he says, well, could you please reach down there with my fingers and to grab them, because I had smaller fingers than he did. And as I'm reaching down there, he's like, and don't short anything out. So I'm reaching down, I grabbed the wrench with my 2 fingers, and I started carefully pulling it out. And right then, Dad went, and I screamed, I dropped the wrench, and I thought I had died. And Dad was laughing so hard he just about peed himself. So all work had to stop until my heart went back to normal, and Dad could catch his breath from laughing. The very last job of the day was to hook a battery charger up to an old RV battery for a guy. So I reached down to hook up the charger, and Dad went from across the shop. Well, I lost it. I was a nervous wreck. Once again, Dad couldn't help but lose his breath from laughter. What a day. One that we both will never forget, but for different reasons. He could fix things. He could make a part. He could make a tool. He could figure out issues others couldn't. If he didn't have the right tool, he'd make one, or he'd modify one of his current tools for that job. He was a whiz at electrical issues and could figure things out that stumped other techs. He always said, Lenore, I'm the smartest man you know. Of course, I always agreed with him. We also unloaded many stacks of trailers in the shop. Even after he got sick, he would still supervise from his chair and run the hoist. So many, many great memories for all of our families made in that shop. So to wrap it up, this is my dad. He always helped whenever he saw a need, no matter how big or how small. When Ashley was young, she was so sad because her doll carriage needed to be fixed. So Dad took it home and carved a new wooden handle for her. Melissa wanted to learn how to harness a team of horses, so he took the time to show her. If Ashley or Melissa needed help with their vehicle, he'd offer. When Steph needed a ride to Saskatchewan for camp, him and Deb loaded up the motorhome and took her. Taylor needed a movable chicken run, so he built one. Whether it was for family or friends or a perfect stranger, he did what he could for everyone. He'd keep his opinions to himself if he thought you were making a mistake until you asked for his advice. Then he'd give you his advice. Often it was the gospel according to James. He had so much knowledge from his life experiences and was rarely stumped for an answer. But if he was, he'd ponder it all night long, and by morning, he'd have a solution for you. He was a loyal person. He created so many lasting friendships. His family meant the world to him, and I truly believe he fought this disease so hard for us. From everything he went through, and how many times the medical staff wrote him off, they were shocked at his strength that he would bounce back again. His grandkids were his pride and joy, and when the great-grandchild came along, his chest busted with pride. He was always the first one to hold Logan and was constantly making Logan smile and laugh. He enjoyed getting out in the open road with his Harley. He enjoyed camping in the motorhome. He enjoyed bringing tires on his '69 Chevelle. He was a straight shooter and didn't put up with any BS. He taught us so much, and yet I wish he was here to teach us more. I'll miss his 6 a.m. texts, his talks, his wisdom, his jokes, and his endless stories. I'm honored to be his daughter, and I will forever cherish the memories. I put together a really short slideshow with a little surprise in the middle. For those of you listening online, you won't be able to hear the music because of copyright issues, but you'll be able to hear the middle part.
Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. Itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again. Itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. There's a time that I
Well, it's been 2 years since Dad passed away, and life carries on. I remember thinking on that day when he passed away how strange it was that everybody around me was just carrying on with their normal day when I was having the worst days of my life. But that's just the way it is. We're often ignorant of the other people's tragedies that are happening around us. I want to share just a few memories and impressions about Dad. I worked for Dad for about 7 years, starting when I was about 16. I apprenticed under him as an automotive service technician and became a Red Seal journeyman while I was working there. And as was mentioned before, Dad seemed to be able to fix pretty much anything or come up with a solution for most problems. When I was struggling to get something apart or fix something, he was my backup plan. When I was working there, I always knew that he'd come up with some idea of how to get this thing apart. And he always carried his Leatherman, something I'll always remember, and he used it all the time. He'd often bug me and tell me that I should be doing the same thing. I need to carry one of those things, but I never took up the habit. But I secretly think he actually enjoyed being able to just pull it out and help everybody out. You know, if you needed pliers or a knife or something, it was always right there. He was a do-it-yourselfer, and I seem to have followed my dad's example in that. It was largely due to his influence that I had the courage to move a house and develop a property in Swalwell shortly after we were married. And Dad was always there for me to ask questions about some aspect of the project, or he was there very many times and helped with the building and moving dirt with his skid steer. And even in recent years now, when we decided to develop our new acreage, it really helped me to get started just knowing that Dad was there. I figured that he'd be able to help me out with a lot of things, and as it turned out, he got sick about the same time, so he wasn't able to physically work that much there, but I still called him often and asked him about advice on things, and he always took a real interest in it, and it was always fun to show him what we had accomplished. When I was still working in the shop with him, I noticed that he always had time for a coffee. Anybody would stop in there, and there was lots of people that stopped in, and many people that stopped there and weren't customers. They were just there to have a coffee and visit. Another thing I always admired about my dad was his readiness to go and help someone or to borrow out some tool or piece of equipment, and I know some of his closer friends that are here would be able to attest to that. Dad was good at building things, and most things that he built, they were strong and they were straight. But one time when we were doing a project together, we were struggling with the straight thing. When I bought the property in Linden, we were renovating our office there, and we gutted the whole office, and we were framing in a new office within that room, so it was just a simple rectangular room, and which is not complicated. And so we laid out the walls, and we could not get this thing to come out straight. We measured and remeasured and cross-measured, and it was never straight. And we got so frustrated, but eventually we just started laughing because it was quite apparent that neither one of us were capable of building this thing straight at all. And eventually we thought we had it solved. We finished the walls, but when I went back weeks later to put flooring in it, it wasn't straight at all. The planking on the one end of the office has a real nice taper on it, so I still don't know to this day why we couldn't get that thing to come out. Another funny story I remember when I was working at the shop. As most of you know, my dad, he wasn't one that just did frivolous things, or he didn't goof off and just do dumb or foolish things. But the one day we were in the shop Tom's quad was in there. He had a little 80cc two-wheel drive. Dad was going to move it, so he jumps on the quad, and he's going to do this power drift inside the shop there. So he gets on it, gives it some throttle, cranks the wheels, and because of his weight and being set back further, instead of the back wheels spinning, they hooked up on the concrete, and this thing takes off straight across the shop. And any of you that were in the shop ever, you know that we had this big used oil container. Like it was like this big around probably and about this deep. We used it to service big trucks, so it would easy hold like 20 gallons of oil. And this quad is heading towards this oil container. Dad saw it was out there, and he went to go grab the brake to stop this thing, and he grabs the front brake on the right-hand side, and he was used to riding his Honda quad, which applied all the brakes. Well, this is a two-wheel drive quad, so it only locked up the front brakes. And while he grabbed this thing, grabbed the brake, he accidentally grabbed the thumb throttle at the same time. So the quad went wide open with the front wheels locked up completely solid. So there's no steering at all across the shop, and went straight into this full barrel of oil. And just before he hit it, he saw what was coming, and I just saw him, like he put his head down like this, and he went straight into this thing with the quad. And what happened was the oil inside this, did this perfect slosh. Like it didn't just fall over the side, it like geysered so high that it actually hit the ceiling in the shop. That's how high the oil went. So needless to say, there was oil everywhere, and everything came to a total standstill, and Dad's sitting there covered in oil, not saying anything. And I didn't know if I should start laughing or not because I thought it was hilarious, but I didn't know what was going to happen. So, but anyways, we spent a lot of time wiping up oil that day. And I think last time I looked, you can still see stains on that ceiling because we got up there on ladders and wiped down the ceiling. So, but yeah, I miss my dad, and I'm sure many of you miss him as well. And I learned a lot, and I think I learned a lot more from him than I actually realized. At this time, I'd like to call my family up here to sing a song with me. This song is titled, God is Still Good, and there's a couple of reasons why I chose this song. When Dad was sick, we'd stop in and visit Dad and Deb there at different times as a family, and we do quite a bit of singing as a family, and we would sometimes sing a song or two while we were there of something we'd been singing at home. And this was the last song that we sang. When Dad was still alive. And the message in this song relates very closely to what I experienced the day that he passed away. Very difficult day, and my mind wanted to go to the why questions. Why was God doing this? Thinking about the has-beens and what could have beens, and it was like God came in an audible voice, and he said, you can choose what you do with this. It can make you better, or you can get bitter about it. And above all, he was letting me know that he was good. And so that's what this song is talking about. And I think there's a reason why the psalmist talks about the valley of the shadow of death. It's a dark time. And I know many of you have faced it in one form or another. And but through those valleys, God is good. So you can come up here and we'll sing this song. As I look back on all of my days, so many times and so many ways, I have been blessed, and all I can say is God is still good. Sometimes the night brings sorrow and pain, sometimes the tears flow like the rain, but through it all, He's never changed. God is still good. God is still good when the waves roll high. God is still good all through the night when I've done all I can and I don't understand. God is still good. Clouds of doubt may darken the ways, but showers of blessings may come any day. He'll bring me through, and I'll stand and say, God is still good, so good. There have been times that I've let Him down, made my mistakes, but still I have found I stumble and fall, but through it all, God is still good. Mercy still flows from the palm of His hand. He will give grace and help me to stand. Although He knows how unworthy I am, God is still good. God is still good when the waves roll high. God is still good all through the night when I've done all I can and I don't understand. God is still good. Clouds of doubt may darken the ways, but showers of blessing may come any day. He'll bring me through, and I'll stand and say, God is still good, so good. God is still good when the waves roll high. God is still good all through the night when I've done all I can and I don't understand. God is still good. Clouds of doubt may darken the ways, but showers of blessings may come any day. He'll bring me through, and I'll stand and say, God is still good, so good.
We started to notice a change in Jim's health in the summer of 2015. He'd always been a hardworking man, but needed to take a break to catch his breath regularly. A couple of times that summer, our camping buddies had to pack up and hook up for us because Jim was struggling. That happened the September long weekend, so when I got back to school Tuesday morning, I made a doctor's appointment for Jim. The doctor checked him out, x-rayed his lungs, and said there was something going on with his left lung, but needed to have the x-rays read. We left the doctor's office and headed to Lenore's to return a generator we had borrowed when Jim's phone rang. The hospital was calling to say he needed to get there immediately. He told them he was busy. But she insisted. When we got there, Jim was told he had a collapsed lung. They inserted a tube to inflate the lung and sent him to Red Deer by ambulance. He spent 3 weeks there. Doctors were unsure what the problem was. After recovering at home for a time, we went to the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, where after a few days of tests, Jim was diagnosed with mesothelioma, the cancer caused by contact with asbestos. Jim began on a journey of chemotherapy, trials, and doctor's appointments. He had several hospital stays and cheated death more than once. Through it all, he never, ever complained. When you read an obituary of someone who passed after a courageous battle with cancer, they are courageous. Jim faced the illness with courage and dignity and chose to live his life out his way. I miss him terribly, but I am so very grateful to have had those 5 years with the ups and downs. We grew even closer during that time, and I want to mention 2 ladies that so capably took over for me when I left the school. Leanna and Chantel, thank you so much. Someone once said that you honor a man by the way you treat his widow. Our friends and family have honored Jim very, very well. Special note goes to those I have listed on the bulletin as honorary casket bearers. These are some of the greatest people you will ever meet. I am forever grateful for the love and support they have shown me. Go Rest High on That Mountain by Vince Gill was another favorite song of Jim's. We played this the day we buried him, so it only seems fitting that we have it here. Kevin, Melissa, and Stephanie are going to share that song with us.
Well, you've heard quite a few stories here. I got a few myself, but I'm not going to get into all those because we'll be here a while. Have any of you ever had a tow by Jim before? Were you in the vehicle behind? Wow. It was like water skiing behind a motorboat on the ice, that's for sure. I got some real hair-raising stories about that one. But anyway, big shoes to fill, that's for sure. No question. I'm not wearing his shoes, but I am wearing his jacket here tonight. Probably the same one you saw in those pictures. You know, a lot of cool things happen after somebody's gone, and I'm just going to share one quick little story, and that's it. I loaded up some equipment. I was heading out to a well site with my equipment on my truck and my trailer, and I had a few things. You know, I always called and asked Jim or sent him a text, and I had some questions about something, and of course, he wasn't there on the other end already because he was gone, but Anyway, I had quite a chat with him in my truck on the drive. Actually, I was having a problem with the trailer, so I actually hooked on a brand new trailer. We sell trailers too, so I hooked on a brand new one and loaded my equipment, and away I went. I went down our gravel road, and I went about 2 hours of highway. I stopped at the Morin brake check, and that quick hopped out and back in again and checked everything out, and then I went up the highway a little farther, and then of course up some back roads and gravel roads and dirt roads and some old trail through the valley. And when I was talking to him, I kept over speeding. I mean, I was in a hurry. I kept hearing it. I kept hearing him say, "Hey, Kevin, you keep her double nickels." That's what he always said, you know. And what's the chance? I would get there and I'm unloading my equipment, and I undo my chains and my boomers on the front of the tractor, so it was on the end of the trailer. And here was 2 nickels sitting on my trailer deck. You tell me. I don't know. I got no other explanation for it other than maybe what I've got for some ideas on that. I've actually got I've got those 2 nickels with me here today. Actually, I shoved them in the pocket, and I thought that was just maybe a sign from him. I mean, you explain it. Drive down the road like that. I don't know. I don't even carry change in my pocket. They couldn't have fallen out of my pocket. Anyway, tribute to Jim. Well, I know your life on earth was trouble, but only you could know the pain. You weren't afraid to face the devil. You were no stranger to rain. So go rest high on that mountain, 'cause son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven to shout love for the Father and Son. Oh, how we cried the day you left us. You gathered round your grave to grieve. Wish I could see the angels' faces when they hear your sweet voice sing. So go rest high on that mountain, 'cause son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven to shout love for the Father and Son. Well, one more little thing, kind of a bit of a surprise here, but I think, if you don't mind. I've got a song I wrote. I'm not going to get into what, basically, what it's about is, in short, it's a tough day today. You know, it's been 2 years, but still, it's like just as fresh as the week it happened. The gist of this song is, you know, we say goodbye. We go to people's places, and then we say, "Hey, we'll see you later," and we walk out the door. We walk out of the truck. They might follow us, and that moment is very insignificant. We don't remember. You guys probably did it hundreds of times this last week with some people, and it's a very insignificant moment. Unless something happens in the meantime, and then that was the last time that you ever actually saw that person, and then it's a moment that you never forget. And I'll never forget that moment. That's really what it's about. And the next thing, what it is, you know, we may not be able to see or touch or look each other in the eye anymore right here, but one of these days, I don't know when, I don't know what time, but I know where, and we'll meet again. Last time I saw you, I won't forget that face. We laughed, we talked, one last walk, and then I drove away. Didn't know in that moment it would be our last goodbye, never to see you again till we reach the other side. Well, I don't know all the time, but I know the place. I know that I will know you when I see your face, and I'll throw my arms around you, and I will not let go. We'll stand in awe with Almighty God. Welcome home. You said he's coming in the twinkling of an eye. When the trumpet sounds from the ground, the dead in Christ will rise. Oh, what a reunion when the angels call our name. I see you, the evidence, he makes all things new again. Oh, well, I don't know the time, but I know the place. I know that I will know you when I see your face, and I'll throw my arms around you. I will not let go. We'll stand in awe with Almighty God. Welcome home. Oh, when I look into the sky, I feel like you were there. I see your eyes, I see your face, I see you everywhere. And it hurts how much I miss you, and the pain won't go away. I miss you, I love you more, is the first thing that I say. Oh, well, I don't know the time, I know the place. I know that I will know you when I see your face, and I'll throw my arm around you, and I will not let go. We'll stand in awe with Almighty God. Welcome home, yeah. Well, I don't When we're home, yeah, we'll stand in awe with Almighty God. Welcome home. Oh, I can't wait to see you again. When we're home. When we're home. So go rest high on that mountain, 'cause Jim, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven shouting love for the Father and the Son. Go to heaven shouting love for the Father and the Son.
As this program comes to a close, I would like to thank every one of you for being here again. I challenge you to recall if you were ever at Jim's shop or at our house when you weren't offered a coffee or a drink. On that note, I invite you to have coffee or a drink with us in memory of Jim. Cheers, or as Jim would say, Di Borge.